I'll tell you later.
Okay. Hi, Michael.
Hello. Sorry about forgetting to send out the last piece.
That's okay. You got it to me, in time for.
I didn't. I thought you had sent something out about Daniel or something.
Yeah.
Was that the third? I had sent out before. Wait, I didn't want to do this. I sent out the 4. I usually send out 4 notes on the pages. I had only sent out 3. So
it's sent the 4th shortly after midnight or something.
Yes,
yeah.
I saw that.
Yeah,
I did not read it.
You're up late.
that's all right. That's okay. We'll get to. Let me just open up here.
Before I forget, next week we may be late because there's something at Temple Bethel. I don't know how long it will run.
Oh, okay, a special program.
They had some program on diversity, equity, and inclusion Yom Kippur afternoon,
Oh,
which we weren't at, but there are 2 follow-up sessions.
oh, I see. Got it.
The first of which is next Sunday. I think, this is for Temple members or something. But
Oh, okay.
And actually, I won't be here next week either because we're going to Iowa City just for the weekend.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
how many grandchildren do you have now?
Still 3.
3.
How about you?
2. How old are they?
So Margalit is 16.
Wow.
And Aviva is 11 and Ori is 8, soon to be 9. How about yours?
Getting close to 6 and getting close to 3.5.
Okay, so still pretty little.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's be.
So, and yours is yours must be getting close to a year.
Oh, our Jack. Yeah, he's his Hebrew birthday was this week. Was Friday, and his 1-year birthday will be November 2nd.
Okay. I couldn't remember when.
Yeah, that's close to a year.
Yeah. So we're very excited about to go and celebrate with them.
Yes.
Okay, so let me pull this up here. I just gotta find it. Hey Ezekiel. Okay, so the you can see this, right? Where I've got the screen up.
Yeah, where are you? What page?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's page 200.
Okay.
Very bottom. We did not get to this last week, and I think that I wanted to start here because it asks a really good question. The Mishnah said that the Purim is celebrated on the 15th of Adar in walled cities from the time of Joshua. And the question that everybody wants to know, of course, is Joshua. What does Joshua have to do with the book of Esther? What about Shushan? And we call it Shushan Purim. So here we're given the explanation, and that actually there is in an early text a suggestion that it should be walled cities from the time of Achashverosh is when you should read the Megillah on the 15th. It's found in this collection known as Tosefta. We've talked about the Baraita. Baraita is an outside text, meaning outside the Mishnah. The Mishnah is that authoritative early teaching of the rabbinic group, the Pharisees, or the outgrowth of the Pharisees, the rabbis, that we call them the sages. The Mishnah is that official. All these rabbis had their own teachings, their own interpretations, legal interpretations. And then they would teach what their teachers taught them. And eventually, as the people are getting spread out everywhere, it's getting a little diffuse. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi creates an authoritative text. But we have all these other, not everything makes it into that text. And much of it is called the Baraita, outside stuff. But there were some Baraitot that were collected into a separate text a little bit later, and that's called the Tosefta. And in the Tosefta, we have a teaching from Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha that says, Krachin hamukafin choma mimot Achashverosh korin b'chamisha asar. Those cities that were surrounded by a wall from the days of Achashverosh, which makes sense because that's the time of Purim. Those cities you read on the 15th. So now, why do you have this difference of opinion? And the Gemara is going to explain to us that, first they want to ask, well, what's Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha's opinion? And he says, Mashu Shushan mukefet choma mimot Achashverosh. Since Shushan was surrounded by a wall the days of Achashverosh, they read on the 15th. Av kol mukefet choma. Every city that from that time that was surrounded by a wall should also read it on the 15th. So then they want to. So then, as always, the Gemara wants to know, well, why the difference of opinion? The Tana Didan, our Tana, which means our Mishnah, my Tama. What's the reason for him then? Why did he say it's pretty logical? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha's view. Why did he come up with this thing about Yehoshua? So the Mishnah's reasoning, or whoever's opinion it was in the Mishnah, derived it from this notion of similar words. And we see this a lot. It's a little dangerous to use that as your principle for determining halakha, because there's a lot of words that are similar and you can come up with all kind of crazy things, but certain traditions are accepted. So according to the Mishnah, in the description of Esther in chapter 9, verse 19, it speaks of the Jews of the villages who lived in these unwalled towns. And also in Deuteronomy, we have a statement of Moses to Joshua that all these cities were fortified with high walls, gates, bars, beside unwalled towns, a great many. So therefore, you've got the same term, prazi, unwalled, in both Esther and in Deuteronomy, the Torah. Just as there, Deuteronomy, the reference is to a city that was surrounded by a wall from the days of Joshua, because obviously unwalled towns, you've got the opposite, you've got walled towns. So too, here it is referring to a city that's surrounded by a wall from the days of Joshua. So that's a little bit off, but so the question is why make that connection? It's a bit of a stretch here, right? Because there's the two books have a similar word describing, city geography. It's so much more logical to use the one that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha used. So what would cause this, bit of a stretch? So it doesn't tell us, although Steinsaltz suggests the main reason that the status of a city is walled or unwalled depends upon the time of Joshua is to show honor to Eretz Yisrael. In the days of, he says here, the cities of Israel were all unwalled cities. I don't know if that's true or not true, but he says that in the time of Joshua, there were walled cities. And because you want to honor Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, that was the understanding of the Jerusalem Talmud, which does have an Israel-centric point of view. I think there's also another aspect is that it's lending credence to Esther as a divine text. Because remember, God never shows up in the book of Esther. So it's a question, is this really a sacred text? God's not even in the book. But by saying that, but because you're drawing an inference from simply a verse in Esther, and therefore making halakha because it's connected to a verse in the Torah, you're heightening the status of Esther as a sacred text, right? Because we see this all the time, where inferences are made from a word in the Torah and a word somewhere else, usually a prophetic text. And you really can only do that if you believe all the texts are seamless. Like it's all, the entire canon is a seamless divine text. So I think that's also important here. They're adding, by connecting it to Deuteronomy, they're connecting it to, they're heightening the sanctity of the text of Esther. Anyway, now they go back and forth, and I'll make sure we get to our page 3 today. So they go back and forth whether, how to understand, well, what day should you read in Shushan? Is Shushan read on the 14th? No, it's read on the 15th because that's where the miracle occurred, even though it wasn't walled in the time of Joshua. How they know, and I don't know how if they have traditions that certain cities were walled at certain times. Today we would have archaeology to let us know the age of some of these walled cities. They may have just a tradition that the cities were walled or not walled. I want to get to the end here because it leads to what we wanted to do today. Let's see, where was it? So this last piece here, it says, the Gemara explains that Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha could have said to you, according to the Tana of our Mishnah, does it work out well? Let's see what's working out well. Oh, this is because the verse in Esther talks about Medina, and what else we had? Mishpacha, Ir ve'ir. It doubled the terms in these verses about where people are observing these days. And of course, since you've got this extra, what's the word? It's an extra term. You could have just said in every Medina and every city, but it says Medina, Ir ve'ir. So what are the extra things we're learning here from these additional terms? And he says the lesson here is that we should follow a teaching, a midrashic explanation by Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who says a walled city and all settlements adjacent to it, and all settlements that can be seen with it, that is, can be seen from the walled city, there you would read as if they were in the walled city itself. So if you're next door, if you're a little town next door to the walled city, you'd still read it on the 15th. That's the decision here. But the reason why I get here, because we mentioned to scholar or that's the word I'm looking for, tradits. And that's going to follow us into the next page. So, how close do you have to be to the walled city to read it on the 15th? Rabbi, and it says here, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah ve'itema Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, and some say it was Rabbi Chia bar Abba, the limit is like the distance from the town of Hamtan to Tveria, which is about a mile, I guess. Meal, tell us what a meal is. Okay. So they should have just said it's a meal. Why give us the Hamtan to Tveria? Because the Gemara answers, the formulation teaches us this: how much distance comprises the measure? Oh, I was asking how much is a meal. Well, the meal is the distance from Hamtan to Tveria. If you're that far, and they had which seems pretty far actually. Here's Tveria, and here's Hamtan. Oh, Hamtan or Hamat Gader.
It says in the notes about
it does?
a kilometer or 1,200 to 1,200 meters.
Oh yeah, here it is, 1,000 to 1,200 meters. So that's pretty far, I guess, actually. Anyway, the reason why I wanted to get to this point was because now we have a bunch of teachings that all begin the same way. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, or some say it was Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So we must have a tradition that these two guys were sometimes confused. Okay, it says, okay. Okay, so here's their teaching. Here's this teaching. It's got nothing to do with the Book of Esther. It's rather that the final letters, Mem, Nun, Sadi, Pei, and Chet, Sofim Amaru, the seers, whoever that is, although we assume it's the prophets, taught them. What does that mean? They taught that these final letters, that we didn't have the letters before. And so there's, the Gemara is a little bit confused. The Tisbara, the Hakativ, Eile HaMitzvot. So what bothers the Gemara is, wait a minute, so basic things like the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, shouldn't that be, and of course from the time of Torah, if the Torah is written in Hebrew, doesn't all that come under the heading of what Moses taught from Sinai, right? That's the verse. These are the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses for the children of Israel at Mount Sinai. It's from Leviticus 27. It indicates that a prophet is not permitted to initiate or change any other matter of halakha. So, I mean, Moses is a prophet, he taught it, but how can you say that, oh, they didn't know all the letters in the alphabet, and the prophets decided, well, these letters should be final letters. Consequently, how could the prophets establish new forms of letters? And furthermore, didn't Rav Chisda say, now we have this midrash, the letters Mem and Samech in the tablets of the covenant given at Sinai stood by way of a miracle. And the note explains here that the letters in the 10 Commandments, those two tablets, were written with God's, according to the Torah, they're written with God's own hand. And therefore they were miraculous, especially the letters of Samech and Mem, which if you're not inscribing them, engraving them. If you're engraving them, that you would completely knock the letter out, right? However, the letter Samech is closed, Mem is closed too. The part of the stone inside the letter could only have remained in place by way of a miracle, as it wouldn't have been attached to the rest of the tablet. So wait a minute. So then they obviously did have the letter Mem, final Mem, at the time of the Torah. So, okay, so the Gemara has to accept that, all right. In, yes, that's true. Mehava havu, velo havu yade he be'emsa teva ve'he be'sof teva, ve'atut sofim ve'takinu. What the prophets did, I guess, according to this idea, at that time of Moses, it wasn't so clear. There were which form of the letter Mem, or Kaf, or Nun, which form was in the middle of the word and which was a final letter. Maybe they were interchangeable. Maybe it wasn't determined yet. The Sofim, these seers, again, we're assuming it's later prophets, came and they established the open forms were to be used in the middle of the word, and the final letters were at the end, and the more open letters were used in the middle. But that's problematic too, because it still seems like they're creating something. They're making a determination that wasn't done at the time of Moses. So then we get another response. Ella shachachum v'chazru v'saddu. And I think this is a really interesting response. Rather, it can be suggested the final letters already existed at the time of the giving of the Torah, but over the course of time, the people forgot them, and the prophets then came and reestablished them. We're going to see that same answer come up a little bit later. And I just think that's a really interesting thing. So the prophets are, first of all, the whole notion that the people would forget this significant tradition. I mean, what letters are final letters and what letters are in the middle, and that the prophets had to come and reestablish them. So, but we'll look at that in a moment when we get to a second time when that's an answer.
Also, this idea that you carved the letters all the way through, or maybe that God did all the way through the stone tablet. That is not how stone tablets work.
Wait. Well, I mean, but if you had, let's say, right, because the other ones, couldn't you, I guess what they're saying is that they're attached in some way?
Well, I mean, if a letter is open and you carved all the way through, all
You're cutting out
you're
a
not
little-
leaving a hole. You're not leaving, the Samach and the Mem, you cut them out, the final ones, cut them out completely.
Right.
You've got this piece in the middle. It's not going to stay there. And
Right,
there's,
right. That's the idea. Right.
It's
but
miraculous.
other letters, you don't have that problem, but just the idea that that's how a tablet would have been made.
That
Oh,
you're
I see.
cutting all the way through the stone.
Right.
I mean, there were
Well-
plenty of stone tablets in Mesopotamia, for example, but
Uh-huh.
they aren't carved all the way through, I don't believe.
Right. Okay. So, but clearly, the idea behind that midrash is that this was miraculous,
Oh,
right?
Right, right.
Absolutely.
So, so if that's the miracle, then wait a minute, how could they have made? Then they knew the mem. They knew the final mem back in the time of Moses.
Right.
So it is kind of interesting so you have a midrash, and then they use the midrash as the basis for trying to understand a different explanation. That if you didn't have that, I mean, it's not like the midrash is law, right? It's one person's explanation of something, and then they fall back on that, and they use that to challenge a completely different teaching. So, but again, it just shows that how the rabbis, or at least later traditions, right? This is the Talmud is post. Who was the rabbi of the? It was Rabbi Yirmiyah's. No. Wait, where I just lost it here. Rav Chisda. This is post Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda is a Talmudic rabbi, but the people putting the Talmud together, right? This is years after Rav Chisda, and but by suggesting that, it's a way of saying that all of these teachings, it's not just the Torah that has to, and the books in the Bible, the biblical canon, are as one seamless whole, but even the later teachings all have to fit with each other. They all have to make sense with each other. And therefore it gives credence to this notion that even midrash, an interpretation of Torah, then becomes, at least some of them, become part of that seamless web. Okay, so we had, so we finished so we came up with the answer for the final letters. Here's another one. Here's another teaching, same attribution. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, and some say it was Rabbi Chia bar Abba who said. So again, confusion between these two rabbis. And this one has to do with translations. Targum shel Torah, the translation of the Torah, Unkelos Hager, Unkelos the convert, Amaro, Mipi Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua. Onkelos, who was a convert, and then we had a little story about Onkelos, is identified with Aquila, who translated the Bible into Greek. It's related that Onkelos, but also into Arabic, but this Onkelos guy translated into Aramaic. He was converted and became a student of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. And there's a story, I think he was like supposed to be or wasn't it in here? No, it doesn't have it. I thought he was, one story is like he was a part of the Roman nobility, but he still, and who converted to Judaism. Anyway, Onkelos, he based it on the teachings of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. So that early generation of scholars, of Mishnah scholars, they're teachers of Rabbi Akiva. So the Aramaic translation of the prophets was by Yonatan ben Uziel, who based his translation going back to the last prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And then, this is really, Venizda Ze'ah Eretz Yisrael, Arba Me'od Parsa, Al Arba Me'od Parsa. Yatzta bat kol ve'amra mi hu zeh shegila starai livnei adam. Okay, so this was really traumatic when Yonatan ben Uziel translated the prophets into the vernacular. There was an earthquake, and a divine voice emerged and said, "Who's revealing my secrets to mankind?" So we have, first of all, we should just note that this is, according to Rabbi Yirmiyahu or Rabbi Chia bar Abba, he's defining who translated, who wrote those Aramaic translations. If you look in any rabbinic Bible with Rashi and Ramban and all those guys, they'll always have the Aramaic translation of the Torah that's known as by Onkelos. And if you look in a book of prophets, it has the Aramaic translation of Yonatan ben Uziel. Anyway, when Yonatan ben Uziel stood up on his feet and said, "I'm the one who's revealed your secrets to mankind through my translation. However, it is revealed and known to you that I did this not for my own honor, not for the honor of the house of my father, but rather for your honor, so that discord not increase among the Jewish people. In the absence of an accepted translation, people will disagree about the meaning of obscure verses, but the translation will help out," which is actually very interesting because we do have disagreements all the time about translations.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
that startled me as a reason.
No, because especially the prophets, because the prophets, if you're pretty good at Hebrew, it's not so hard to read the Torah and make sense of it. But every week when we get to the Haftarah, I mean, unless I've spent time going through the Haftarah portion, I can't understand what the Hebrew is talking about without the English translation, because the words, first of all, it's written in poetry, and which means, it's not the what's the word I'm looking for? The order of the grammar is different. The words are different. They're making allusions to things that you have to really know the period of time. So it is much harder. So Yonatan ben Uziel was really doing a service by translating it, making it clear, and having this kind of authoritative vernacular translation. I mean, it's almost like saying the NJPS, the new JPS translation, is like the authoritative English translation of the Bible. And if you look, so there is the Art Scroll. Art Scroll will translate it very differently because Art Scroll is translating it according to rabbinic commentary, but according to Rashi's interpretation, not according to the text itself. They're reading the Torah through Rashi. NJPS attempts to read the Torah as it was made to make sense of in that time. So translations are very controversial. And here we have that Yonatan ben Uziel then wanted to translate the Ketuvim. And then it said, okay, that's enough. No more. Why wasn't he allowed? Dayecha, says the divine voice, enough with you. My Tama was the reason, Mishum the Itbe Kates Mashiach, because if you know how to read the Ketuvim sections appropriately, then you will know when the Messiah is coming. And that's always a dangerous thing. We have these traditions that anybody who tries to determine the end of time, bad things happen to you. That's supposed to be secret knowledge. The only thing I didn't understand here is the end is foretold in a cryptic manner in the book of Daniel, and where the book of Daniel translated, the end would become manifestly revealed to all. But I guess when he says translated, maybe he means interpreted in a way, because most of the book of Daniel is in Aramaic. That's how we know it's a later book. But yes, supposedly the book of Daniel has these secret explanations of when the end is coming. So then we have a question. Then the Gemara asks, wait a minute. V'targum shel Torah unkelos hager amaro. Did he really translate it? Didn't Rav Ika bar Avin say that Rav Hananel said, that Rav said, what is the meaning of that which is written with respect to the days of Ezra? In the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, and I got my centuries and years mixed up. The Ezra and Nehemiah lived in the 5th century, 400s, not the 4th century. I always get that confused, especially with BCE. It gets very confusing. They're in the 400s before the Common Era, which is the 5th century before the Common Era. They're the ones who return from Persia, from this Babylonian Persian exile. They're the leaders. Nehemiah is a political leader. Ezra is the religious leader. And they come back to encourage the people to rebuild the temple. And before they engage in the building, they actually have a day where they read the entire Torah. Now, this is where the concept that Ezra, the scribe, was probably the person who first started putting the canon together as we have it. And before that, we have a lot of disparate documents. The famous one is JEPD, but there may have been more. You get down to the weeds and there's lots of different, maybe there were 2 or 3 versions of the priestly texts. And so you have these different documents that different communities among the people of Israel had written. And then Ezra, during this time in Babylonia, and his school are weaving together. Anyway, when they get back to the land of Israel, they have some kind of canon, maybe not the entire, maybe it's not fixed completely, at least that's what latest scholarship suggests, but they had something, and they read the entire book of the Torah to the people. Well, it says, let's see, they have the verse here, Vayikru'u b'sefer Torah ha'Elohim, miforash. This, he translates here distinctly, or interpreted, clarified. So they read the book of the Torah as they had it, and then they had to explain it to the people. Well, that sounds like a targum. That sounds like a translation of what they were reading. He says it's translated into Aramaic. Maybe that is the language of the people. I don't know what the actual vernacular or form of the vernacular was at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. And maybe it was some form of Aramaic, but it wasn't Hebrew anymore. And so they had to explain to the people what these Hebrew words meant. V'som sechal, elu apsukim, v'yavinu b'mikra. So they gave sense, that is, they had broken up the text into separate verses, because the understanding is at one point the text was just written with letters just going on, and you have to know how to break it up. That's actually what the Masoretes did in the 7th century of the Common Era, is breaking up the entire Bible into the canon into separate verses, and then cause them to understand the reading. That's the cantillation notes, because the cantillation, the tropes, the ta'amim, they don't just give us the music, they actually break up how to pronounce the word and the syntax of the verses. Amrila elu hamesoret, or some say these are the Masoretic traditions with regard to how the word should be written, right? Because we have that too in the Torah. You have different traditions of, sometimes in the Torah, the word is written in one way, pronounced differently. So these are the traditions that they may have done it as early, according to the Talmud, as period of Nehemiah and Ezra. But in any case, it suggests that the Aramaic translation existed before the Second Temple. And here we have the same answer. Well, yes, the ancient Aramaic translation, there was one, but it was forgotten, and then Onkelos came and reestablished it. And I just wonder, what does that mean? What does it mean to say that something was known in the past, but forgotten and then reestablished? First of all, why would you say it was reestablished? Means that you obviously know more, with maybe more historical accuracy, that the reestablishment may have been actually understood to be the creation of that change, like before with the prophets. Maybe they did actually come and determine the Hebrew alphabet at a later time than Moses. Maybe you did, this is a little bit easier because it's closer to their own time period, that Onkelos really was the translator of the text. But you say, no, but actually it has a more ancient history and he just reestablished it. I'm not sure. I don't really know what that, but I just think it's so interesting to have that same explanation given twice on the same page, basically, of the Talmud. That, yeah, we knew it. It wasn't really established by the person we say it was. It has a much older history, but people forgot it, and then they brought it back.
This could also be a way of legitimizing what he has done.
Yes.
He didn't create this. We already had it. So there's no question of his, one can't cast any doubt on what he has done.
Right. Can't cast down on what he's done. And also there's this greater authority to the older it is, right?
Exactly.
So that's kind of, it's interesting. But I just thought that was so fascinating that two different contexts, but the same explanation of it wasn't really done at the time we thought it was done earlier, but people forgot it. And the whole notion of people forgetting a tradition and then reestablishing a tradition. How would he have known if if they forgot it? How would Onkelos have known what it was in the past? Too. That's kind of a curiosity here. Okay, so then we get to this. So what was different about so when Onkelos translated the Torah, it doesn't say that the Eretz Israel had this earthquake, like, oh my goodness, something significant was going on. Whereas when Yonatan ben Uziel translated it, there was this earthquake, as if God wasn't happy. And the Gemara explains the meaning of matters discussed in the Torah are clear. The Aramaic translation didn't reveal the meaning. Conversely, the prophets, there are matters that are clear and there are matters that are obscure. And then we get an example of this. For example, this verse, Bayom hahu yigdal hamispeid berushalem kimispeid hadad rimon bevikat Megiddo. On that day, there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem, like the morning of Hadad Rimon in the valley of Megiddo. That was from Zechariah, where he's talking about like kind of end of days battles. V'amar Rav Yosef, Il malei targuma de haikra lo yadana mai ka'amar. Rav Yosef said, were it not for that and from Aramaic translation, we wouldn't have known what it was really saying, because the Bible doesn't mention any incident involving Hadad Rimon at Megiddo. The Aramaic translation explains on that day, the mourning in Jerusalem will be as great as the mourning for Achav, son of Omri, who was slain by Hadad Rimon, son of Tavrimon in Ramoth Gilead, and like the mourning for Josiah, the son of Ammon, who was slain by Pharaoh, the lame, in the valley of Megiddo. The translation clarifies that the verse is referring to two separate incidents of mourning, and therefore it clarifies the meaning of the verse. Okay, so then we have another piece here about the need for translation. The Gemara introduces another statement for the same line of tradition. The verse says, "And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them so that they fled to hide themselves." So who were these men who did not see the vision? The term men, man ninhu anashim, amar Rabbi Yirmiyah ve'itema Rabbi. Same statement or organization of scholars, right? As Yirmiyah, and some say it was Rabbi Chia bar Abba, so there's another example of that. Ze Chagai, Zechariah, Umalachai. what was the word? Anashim. So the term Anashim here doesn't mean just any men, it means special men. In this case, the last three prophets, the later prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, who were living around the same time as Daniel. And the Gemara comments, in certain ways, the prophets, were greater than Daniel, but in certain ways, Daniel was even greater than the prophets. They were greater than him because they were prophets, and he was not a prophet. Let's see what the Torah Evan writes. Daniel was not a prophet at all, as we do not find that God himself spoke to him, but he did have visions. Okay, so he's not. But other authorities did consider him a prophet. But in this case, he was never spoken directly by two. He was never spoken. God never spoke to him directly. Whereas Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi did share the divine word. But on the other hand, he was greater than them because he had his vision, and they didn't see this particular vision as described in Daniel, indicating that his ability to perceive obscure and cryptic visions was greater than theirs. So then the Gemara asks the question: why were they afraid if they didn't see the vision, right? So they didn't know what was going on. Why would they be afraid? Their guardian angels saw it, and therefore they sensed something was scary, and they fled. And then Ravina learns a lesson from this. Shmamina, Haiman de mivit afal gav de ihu lo chazi mazle haze. Even though, so a person who, if you ever feel frightened and there's no obvious reason, it may be because you don't see anything frightening before you. It may be that your guardian angel, your mazal, in this, it's how they're translated here, your mazal, sees it and wants you to take steps in order to escape danger. So I thought this was interesting because this is kind of like, sometimes we do. And I think that Ravina is trying to explain that sometimes there are moments when we sense danger, but there's nothing around us. It's that third eye, that intuition that we have. Lizzie always talks about her gut intuition. Her emotional intelligence tells you that something's not right. Move. And here this is the Talmudic explanation. You've got this guardian angel who is recognizing it and letting you know to escape the danger. So what's the remedy?
Can I be heard? I'm just curious.
Oh,
Can you hear
yeah.
me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Is mazal the same as mazal tov, or is that a different
Yes,
word?
yes, exactly. Mazal, it can be understood as luck. That's how we usually translate it. But mazal is also the zodiac are the mazalot. And it's understood that those are, kind of fates, destinies. And so he translated it here as guardian angel, but it could be, again, your, it's a horoscope, basically, right? That's what the zodiac, we interpret as your horoscope, depending on when you're born and what your mazal is, what your sign is, you have a special, special destiny for you on any given day. So that's how they're understanding mazal here, as this guardian angel, this what's the word? Not superstition, but I don't know what your horoscope is. Your a reading of your luck or your destiny. Is that what I'm looking for? So yes, but that's what the word is here. It can be used in all these senses. So what do you do if you feel this danger? You should escape. So what do you, or if you just need protection? Well, recite the Shema. So that's a good thing. So the Shema here is described as like an amulet, protecting you. You say the Shema. But what if you can't say the Shema? Because you're not supposed to say the Shema in a dirty place, a bathroom or something like that, or an alleyway that has a lot of garbage in it. Oh, so you should move yourself from wherever the garbage is, and then you can recite the Shema. But if you can't do that, because maybe the whole area, you're in a place of garbage, you recite the following incantation. Iza deve tabache shmina minai. The goat of the slaughterhouse is fatter than I. So that meaning that if the calamity has to fall, let it fall on something like the fat goat. He's more worthy of being slaughtered than me, of attacked. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting because, we like to believe that we're not superstitious. We're very rational as Jews. Well, not so much.
Well,
Okay. Yeah.
this is particularly well chosen because it's pretty clear that there's going to be a calamity fall upon the goat.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Let it fall on that fat goat, not me. Okay, so anyway, after this digression, we're back to the book of Esther. And we have this verse, it was in verse 28, where it distinguishes between, they translate it as every province, but literally it's province and province, city and city, and they're going to make they're going to make a midrash on this. Or we've already done that we got the whole walled city versus unwalled city, but the verse continues, mishpacha umishpacha, family and family. So why does it use those terms twice? Well, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said, the words come to include priestly and Levitical families and indicate that they cancel their service in the temple and come to hear the reading of the Megillah. I should really read, where's that verse? Didn't have the entire... So what's the verse stating in Esther? 19, I should have had this called up, but let's read it. Here we go.
There are no Levitical families in Esther.
Right. Well, no. At the time of Esther, they're right. They don't mention any Levitical families. That's
No, in the book.
In the book.
Right. But wait, let me just find the verse so I know what they're doing a drash on. Wait, what? It was verse 28. Okay. So the verse 20, consequently, these days are recalled and observed in every generation by every family and family, every province and province, every city and city. And these days of Purim shall never cease among the Jews, and the memory of them shall never perish among their descendants. So the context of the verse is remembering this holy day, this new holiday, this new observance of Purim. And what that means is, so what we're going to see is the essence of remembering is reciting the Megillah. So why does it say, so what can we learn from the fact that it says every family and family should be recalling these days? Well, we want to, the lesson that we're drawing from it is priestly and Levitical families as well as non-priestly and Levitical families. And what's the significance there? It indicates that they cancel their service in the temple to come hear the reading of the Megillah. So every day there's a worship service in the temple. Priests and Levitical families, especially those on call those weeks, are reciting, are doing their regular cultic duties. But when it comes to Purim, they have to, they pause to make sure they can come hear the reading of the Megillah. Megillah takes precedence over whatever their duties in the temple are. As Rav Yehuda said, the priests at their temple service, the Levites on their platform in the temple, where they sung the daily psalm, and the Israelites at their watches. Remember, we learned that from Tanit, the group of Israelites who, corresponding to the priestly watches, who would come to Jerusalem, gather in other locations, to observe or pray for the success of the temple service. They all cancel their service, at least for the moment, and come to hear the reading of the Megillah. Megillah takes precedence. This is also in a Baraita. The priests at their service, the Levites on their platform, the Israelites at their watches, all cancel their service and come to hear the reading of the Megillah. From this, the house of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi learned this halacha, that one cancels one's Torah service, Torah study, and comes to hear the reading of the Megillah. So he derives from this idea that the priests and the Levites cancel their service to hear Megillah. Megillah takes precedence. So therefore, he understands that you cancel Torah study as well, because it's a kal v'chomer, as we call it. It's a major to minor. If you can cancel the study of, the priestly service, certainly you can study Torah, because priestly service is more important. The cultic service in the temple is more significant than Torah study. So therefore, you cancel Torah study as well in order to make sure you go hear the Megillah. Or maybe it's a better way to say you pause your Torah study to make sure you hear the Megillah. Now there's going to get pushback. Whoa, wait a minute. You're telling me that the Torah temple service is more important than Torah study? And then we go through this long explanation from Joshua again. We have this verse in Joshua chapter 5, before they go after Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes, he looked, behold, a man stood over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua says to him, are you on our side or for our adversaries? And he says, no, I'm a captain of the Lord of the host, and I've come now. And Joshua fell on his face and bowed down. And because we're going to say, well, wait a minute, the question is going to be, why wasn't he studying Torah at this moment? And that's why the angel is coming to him to rebuke him for not studying Torah in the evening after I guess before the Battle of Jericho. He was out. Well, we'll get to it. Okay, so before we even get to that whole thing, they want to say, wait a minute. How did Joshua do this? How did he bow down to a figure he doesn't know who it is? Like, aren't we, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi taught, it's prohibited for a person to greet a fellow at night if you don't recognize him. Maybe it's a demon, or maybe it's just a dangerous person. So how did he know it wasn't a demon? Why did he bow down to him? Well, wait a minute. First of all, the guy said, it said he was a captain of the host. How does he know it was a demon? Demons don't tell the truth. He could have lied. Yeah, but he would not have said the name of God if he was a demon. They can't do that. So therefore, he knew it wasn't a demon. He knew it was an angel, and he bows down. So,
Perfect.
okay. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. Yesterday, okay. So then the issue is yesterday during the afternoon, you neglected the afternoon daily offering, right? Because you were about to go into battle. But now it's nighttime. Why aren't you studying Torah? And that's what Joshua was asking. What sins did we commit? And he said, you've been neglecting Torah study. And we know this because later on in the book of Joshua, after this meeting with the angel, the term Joshua lodged that night in the midst of the valley Ha'emek, Rabbi Yochanan understood as, he was studying the depths of halakha. It wasn't talking about a place. It was talking about his commitment, the depth of study that he was doing. So since there he learned that he shouldn't have stopped studying, we learned that later on he does continue to study Torah at night. So that's what the angel was complaining about, is he wasn't studying Torah at night. And so he learned from that meeting with the angel. And then we have a follow-up by Rav Shmuel Bar Unya that Torah study is greater than sacrificing the daily offerings, because it was okay that they put off the daily sacrifices as they were getting ready for war, but it's not okay that they put off learning Torah. And so, but the Gemara, as it will often do, no, it brings it's okay. We can learn from both these situations because they're very different situations. In one case, with Joshua, the Torah study was group study. The people studied Torah together in the evening, and that was greater than the temple service. And he learns that we shouldn't put off Torah study at night as a community. What the sages of the house of Rav Yehuda Anasi were referring to is Torah study by an individual. That an individual is not as significant, learning Torah is not as significant as the temple service. So in the hierarchy of values, you have group Torah study, temple service. Again, these are both communal activities, followed by individual study Torah. And then we have this long passage to try to understand if that's correct. Is Torah study of an individual such a light matter that it's lesser than the temple service? And the explanation is that on festival days, if a person dies, you have a certain level of grieving that's permitted. There's different types of grieving. You have lamenting, you have clapping your hands, and you have wailing. And we learn here from Rabbi Yishmael that those that are close to the bier, the body is sitting on the bier, may clap. And on Hanukkah and Purim holiday days, which are not mandated by the Torah, they may actually lament and clap, but they can't wail responsibly. That's a higher level of grieving. And because it's a holiday day, you're not supposed to. And Rabbi Bar Huna says, wait a minute, all these regulations were said with regard to an ordinary person, but there are no restrictions on expressions of mourning on the intermediate days of a festival for a deceased Torah scholar. So if a Torah scholar just dies on the intermediate days of a festival, there is no limit to your grieving. And that's true even the more so on Purim, which is not a Torah holiday, right? So this indicates that even the Torah study of an individual is of great importance, because you could pause your Torah study to go grieve fully if a Torah scholar dies. So important was the Torah scholar. But then the Gemara rejects that, because we're talking about two different things. There's Kavod Torah and there's Talmud Torah. Kavod Torah, honoring the Torah, and a Torah scholar is the embodiment of Torah. You can push off all holiday observances to treat with proper respect a Torah scholar, because they embody Torah. But in the case compared to but regarding Talmud Torah, that's lesser. You can pause your Torah study, you the individual, can pause your Torah study to go and hear the Megillah. So we're talking about two different things, apples and oranges, honoring Torah and studying Torah. You can pause your Torah, the individual can pause their Torah study for holiday observances. Okay, then we continue. We're almost on time here again. Rava said, it's obvious to me that if one must choose between temple service and reading the Megillah takes precedence. Based on that exposition of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, that we just learned, of learning from Mishpacha. Mishpacha means that even the priests and the Levites pause what they were doing. Similarly, if one must choose between Torah study and the reading of Megillah, reading of the Megillah takes precedence based on what we just learned from Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that one interrupts Torah study to hear the reading of the Megillah. Then they go on. In fact, you can interrupt your Torah study if there is a corpse, a meit mitzvah, that is a dead person with no one to bury, has no family to bury it. The task of burying the meit mitzvah takes precedence. And this is derived from that which was taught in a Baraita. Mivadlin Talmud Torah lahotza'at meit ulahachnasat kala avodah umeit mitzvah adif mivila'achoto. One cancels one's Torah study to bring out the corpse for burial, to join a wedding procession and bring in the bride, and if there's a difference between avodah and mate mitzvah takes precedence. And this is derived from a teaching about the Nazir, right? Or is it, the Nazarite, because the Nazir is not allowed to deal with death. When in this 30-day period, when the Nazir is under this vow, he's not allowed to come close to a dead body, even for his family. He can't be involved in the burying of family members, except there's this additional verse. What's the meaning of the verse when it says, or for his sister? So the previous verse, which says the Nazarite may not come near a dead body, prohibits him from becoming impure through contact with his sister. Therefore, the second verse is understood to be teaching a different halakha. One who was going to slaughter his paschal lamb or to circumcise his son, and he heard that a relative of his died, one might have thought that he should return and become ritually impure with the impurity imparted by a corpse. But you said he shall not become impure. The death of his relative will not override the significance of this other mitzvah of the Torah. We're talking about the slaughtering of the paschal lamb or circumcising the son. That comes, you got to finish that before you take care of the dead. One might have thought, just as one does not become impure for his sister, so he does not become impure for a corpse who has no one to bury it. That's why the state says, or for his sister, he may not become impure for his sister, but he does become impure for a mate mitzvah. So the fact that it was obvious, why do you state something that's obvious in the Torah? Because you're deriving a lesson from what's not stated. You didn't have to teach or for his sister so by teaching something that was obvious, we learn that there might be a case where you do have to take care of the dead first and override this vow, and that happens to be for a person who doesn't have anyone to take care of them. And on the basis of those premises, if one must choose between reading the Megillah and tending to a mate mitzvah, which takes precedence? Does reading the Megillah takes precedence because it's publicizing the miracle? And we just learned, we talked about how important the Megillah reading is. That you pause your Torah study, you pause the avodah in the temple. So does that become precedent? Because again, you're publicizing the miracle, or burying the mate mitzvah, because that has to do with kavod habriot, dignity, human dignity. And the lesson he derives is human dignity comes first. Gadol kavod habriot shedocha et lo ta'aseh shabbat Torah. Human dignity is so great, it even overrides a prohibition in the Torah. And that's a really important lesson to learn from this, I think from this study, that human dignity, and in this case, because the dignity here, it's not even to a live person, it's to a deceased person. A person who is deceased, the precedence is to care for this person who has no family members, or we don't know who the family members are, and is just lying there. Well, you know what? Everybody among the Jewish people then becomes responsible to take care of this individual. How much the more so human dignity of those who are living. So that's a really important principle in Jewish law, kavod habriot. Let's finish this quickly. We'll just try to finish up real quick this last section and 3b. A walled city and all the settlements adjacent and all settlements that can be seen within it are considered like the walled city, we learned, so that they also read on the 15th. We'll get down here to, well, how do you determine what a city is? Walled or not walled? I mean, what's considered a city? And Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi taught a walled city is one that does not have 10 idlers. No. A walled city that does not have 10 idlers is treated like a village. And and I question his translation here of idlers. Idlers sounds like a bunch of 10 lazy people who don't have anything to do. Batlanim. Batel is to be, batlan is a person who doesn't have any responsibilities. But it's not the idea here of 10 people sitting around, like homeless people who don't have anything to do. Rather, it is 10 people who they're basically like retirees. They're not working anymore, and therefore, or they're wealthy enough that they don't have to work, and they become the communal reps. They start the davening every day. They take care of other communal needs. They're kind of like, in some sense, they're the leaders of the community. They're the elders of the community. And so what's the teaching here is we've already learned in a Mishnah, what's a large city? Any city in which there are 10 idlers. If fewer than that, so even if it's a big town, it has a lot of people in it, if it doesn't have 10 people like this, who are wealthy enough and free enough to take care of communal obligations, it has the status of a village. Nevertheless, it was necessary for Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi to teach this halacha with regard to a large city, to indicate that even if idlers happen to come there from elsewhere, they are not, if they're not local residents, it's still considered like a village. So you got to have 10 people who live in that town who have this status. And I think we'll finish up here.
You have a ready-made minion. That's great.
Exactly. That was I pointed out Chaim Grada's wonderful, just an outstanding Yiddish writer. He doesn't get enough credit. Everybody gives credit to Isaac Bashevis Singer, but his stories are just weird stories. Chaim Grada's books and stories really give you an authentic image of that world that he's writing about. And he writes in this book called The Wall, one of the characters aspires to be a batlan. And what does that mean? That he gets to sit and study all day in the synagogue, and he's the first one there, to help make the minyan. And that's what a batlan is. Okay, so it has status. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi then concludes a walled city that was destroyed and then later settled is considered a city. The Gemara asks, what is meant by the term destroyed? If we say that the city's walls were destroyed, and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi comes to teach us that if it was settled, yes, it's treated as a walled city, but if it wasn't settled, it is not treated that way. We have this difficulty. So it's a little bit confusing here. What does it mean of a walled city? So again, we have this idea, just like we had at the beginning. Something existed, it was destroyed, then later resettled, and so then it's considered to be like this a krach of a walled city again. So what does it mean it was destroyed? If you say that the walls were destroyed, but it's settled, then it's considered to be a city again. And we get that category of city. It's considered status as a city. But if it wasn't settled, I'm not sure what that means. It wasn't settled. Maybe it wasn't that people didn't move back to it or something, or not enough people moved back. It's not considered to be a city again, status of a city. And then we say here, isn't it taught in a Baraita that Rabbi Eliezer Bar Yossi says that which has a wall, asher lo choma. Notice in the Hebrew, the word is written lamed vav aleph. There's two ways. Lo with lamed aleph is no, negative. Lamed vav is the, what's the word I'm looking for? It's
Possessive.
Possessive, thank you. Which has a wall, and the word lo written with an aleph, which means no, but in context, the word lo is used as thought it was written with a vav, meaning that it has a wall.
Well, also, ear is feminine, so la would be more likely. But there are apparently a lot of manuscripts with lo. I mean, this would be things like the Greek and various Latin.
Right. Although is the possessive referring to, oh, right. Well, right. Ir would be feminine. Chomaz also should be feminine. Yeah, that's a good point. This indicates that even though the city does not have a wall now, as the wall was destroyed, if it had a wall before, it retains its status as a walled city. So, right. So it's just like we had before, where it was something that was in the past, then it was forgotten, then it was brought back again. And it has that ancient status, the original status.
Sounds like the whole subject is not yet settled.
Ella, my charav. Oh, here we have a different interpretation of charav. What does it mean that it was destroyed? That it was destroyed in the sense that it no longer has those 10 batlanim. And therefore it's again treated like a village. However, once it has the batlanim, it's treated like a city. So we have this notion of what is it, the status of a city, especially of a walled city. Does it lose its status if the walls were destroyed, but the wall wasn't brought back? Or does it have to have the walls rebuilt? Or does it lose its status? It was a walled city, but then it doesn't have the batlanim anymore. So what really makes the status, what brings its status back? Is it the people, the community who lives in the city? Or is it the physical structure, having that wall surrounding the city that makes it a walled city, even if it was once destroyed? So they go back and forth. So two possibilities. Okay, well, we'll get to that next week. All right. Let's wait, no, stop share.
The main purpose of the wall is protection. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it would have been protection in that early period. To have the wall would have protected the inhabitants. And that's the point, I guess, of having the wall. So, but again, but see, that's the interesting, that second drash, what, I don't know if I would call protect, but what gives the city status? Maybe it's the community in the city, not the physical aspect of it. So I think that's kind of interesting to know, what does it mean to have that status of a larger city? People, the community power, or the configuration, the physical configuration? And that's where we'll leave off this week. All right, we'll